Hey guys, this is Justin. Thank you for joining me today. I'm very happy to see you. Now, today's video will contain spoilers for the most recent episode of the Book of Boba Fett. We'll be talking about one of the most important characters to Star Wars canon, Din Djarin himself, the Mandalorian. So there's your warning there. Now, specifically, I want to talk about some things that I think a lot of people have been missing that we saw from Din in the most recent episode of the Book of Boba Fett. I've almost been calling it the Mandalorian. I'm probably going to make that mistake sometimes throughout this episode, and that's simply because this could have been the Mandalorian Season 3, Episode 1. That, however, is a topic for a different day. So, as a brief summary, the Book of Boba Fett Episode 5 starts off with the Mandalorian using his darksaber to track down and take a bounty in, which he uses to find the location of his Mandalorian sect, which has been hiding out on the ring world, and we see that he tries to fully reintegrate himself in their culture. Ultimately, he is kicked out because it turns out he's violated one of their most sacred rules. He's taken off his helmet, not only once, but several times, including, I think, most notably when he's saying goodbye to his adopted son, Grogu. But him being kicked out notwithstanding, a lot of people sort of were complaining online that this is a real misunderstanding of the character, or that his character development from seasons 1 and 2 has been undone. And this is because a lot of The Mandalorian has been about Din Djarin breaking through his strange conditioning and how the power of love in his child fundamentally changed him in a really interesting way. I'm going to say that I think that complaint is completely without merit, and I'm going to cover why in this video, then also touch on a few other issues at the end. So, the Mandalorian going into this episode is in a very difficult spot. He has, for all intents and purposes, become a father. Of course, Grogu is not his biological child, but he's taken on the role of father, and as a dad myself, that is something that fundamentally changes even an average ordinary person. The Mandalorian, however, is not an ordinary person. He grew up essentially in a hardline conservative Mandalorian cult, where he's essentially outlawed from showing physical touch and affection because he's required to keep his helmet on. The Mandalorian at the end of season 2 is dealing with a very, very difficult decision for a parent. He has to put what he believes is the best interests of the child above his own personal interests. And ultimately, he loses this one force that changed his life, and he's taken to a very weird spot. I'll come back to that in a second, but this also takes us into the idea of character development. And in doing some reading for this video, I did read some academic essays and stuff, but it ended up being a Tumblr post of all things, which I think summed up some important ideas all around. I'm going to link to it down in the description, but I'll also read parts of it now. We always talk a great deal about character development. What do they learn? What do they overcome? How can they win? But I want to point out that can also be quite interesting to think about it in a less forward-moving way, because development doesn't necessarily mean change for the better. Maybe you can ask yourself, where do they fail? What falsehoods do they learn to believe? Do they fall back into old patterns? Are they changing for the worst? And I think it's the end of that excerpt there, which is really important when it comes to the character of the Mandalorian. When it comes to Din Djarin overcoming the conditioning that he's been subject to, it's not as simple as hitting a switch and it's over. You have to remember, Din Djarin was taken in by the Mandalorians at a very young age. They were essentially a stand-in for his family, and he's extremely loyal to them as well. With Grogu gone, honestly, it makes a lot of sense that the Mandalorian looking for purpose in his life would fall back into old habits. This is the relapse or the regression or the step back. Character progression isn't necessarily linear, and if anything, these pitfalls add more nuance and richness to the story overall, and it actually speaks to the depth of the Mandalorian's conditioning. He's got nothing else to go for in his life, so he goes back to what's comfortable. And this is far, far from the only time this happens in Star Wars. If you like the sequel trilogy, I mean, there's a very obvious example. In The Last Jedi, Luke almost relapses and attacks Ben out of fear. However, in the end, he has grown as a character, so he doesn't make the same mistake that he made with his father during their battle on the second Death Star. If you don't like the sequel trilogy, there's another really good example in the first ever Star Wars movie, Han Solo. That movie reveals that Han's not the simple smuggler he claims to be, and in fact, he has a conscience. Still, the simple smuggler part of himself tries to run away before the final battle, seeing that there's no profit in it, but great risk. But notwithstanding those factors, he ends up coming coming back at the end. A lot of people have made the comparison to the Mandalorian being somewhat like a divorced dad now that Grogu's gone. And while that's meant to be a joke, there is, I think, some truth to that. If a dad or any parents loses custody of their children, or at least doesn't get to see their kids as much, they do often find themselves without purpose in their life, and that definitely can lead to something like regression, a kind of questioning of what you're supposed to be doing with your life. And yeah, that's a one-to-one comparison in this case, because both the divorced dad and the Mandalorian have lost the thing that more than anything else makes them happy and are now looking to fill that void. Loss leaves a vacuum that can often be filled by what's comfortable, and often what's comfortable is not necessarily what's healthy. That being said, I think there's also a very deep moment before the Mandalorian leaves, one that a lot of people have been writing off or questioning. The Mandalorian is asked by the armorer whether he's ever taken off his helmet, and he tells the truth. A lot of people are wondering, why did the Mandalorian just not lie? Is that forbidden in their code or something? And no, I don't think that's the case at all. I think the Mandalorian tells the truth because to do anything else would really be rejecting the love that he has for Grogu. The Mandalorian is not ashamed by taking off his helmet to say goodbye to his son, nor should he be. And I think in that moment, he realizes that living as he has with Grogu, which is something that makes him happier than anything else, is incompatible with his life within this Mandalorian sect. That's why I don't think we will ultimately see the Mandalorian redeem himself and rejoin the sect, whether with Grogu or not, because I think that would be mishandled character development. He could lead Mandalore as a whole. He could even bring those Mandalorians back into the fold. I don't think he will. I think, if anything, they'll end up becoming his enemies, but the show should end with him having fundamentally changed and moved away. I think the end of that sequence was a representation that, despite the fact that the Mandalorian has had temporary relapses or regressions back into what's comfortable, that fundamental change still does exist. That's just my opinion, though. I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Do you agree that they handled the character progression of the Mandalorian in an interesting way? I think Star Wars is best when the characters are flawed. That's why Jason and Anakin and even Luke, in my opinion, are so interesting. Or do you disagree, which is totally fine, and think that they are mishandling Din Djarin's character by making him fall back into old habit? Let me know all of that and more down below. I look forward to reading your opinions, and I'll be hearting a bunch after this video goes live. Until next time, though, guys, be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.